Hello. There is an old beastman saying, "The shadow giveth, the shadow taketh, and the shadow giveth back again." At least, I'd like to think so, because it would be appropriate. When we look at the beastmen of Warhammer, they used to be featured as an iconic villain in the world of Warhammer Fantasy, but then that universe was brought to an end. The Warhammer game was cancelled, and the Warhammer world was destroyed. The beastmen, though, they reappeared in the Age of Sigmar, the sequel that took place on the Mortal Realms. They even were at the heart of one of the stories that was developing in the lore. And then, well, they were taken again. For business reasons, they were removed from the game, and now they are returning to Warhammer in the old world. The beast has given again. You already know all of that, of course, but I was pondering as a result of it a very cool aspect of beastman lore that intersects with this various business developments and the changes to the nature of the beastman army, because it takes place across the entire history of beastmen as their own distinct faction. That is the special character, or the entity, I suppose, this great mutator, the Beast Lord, Bray Shaman, Master of Skulls, Morghur. I thought it would be a fun little video to spend a few minutes just exploring this cool aspect of beastman lore and trying to work out just what's been going on, I suppose. So here we go. I am Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm having a little exploration of the mystery of Morghur. Morghur was introduced alongside the first dedicated Warhammer Armies book for the Beasts of Chaos. That came in the 6th edition of Warhammer Fantasy. That character was introduced with an incredible bit of backstory, but became something greater, a kind of spirit, a kind of demigod of the beasts over the course of a number of retcons and evolutions. And then in Age of Sigmar, this same character, this same sort of god, became the MacGuffin around which some of the narrative was built over the course of the era of the beasts. And then only recently that has changed because the Age of Sigmar is losing the Beastmen army. And yet, to balance things out, we've had the reintroduction of the Beastmen for the old world and the appearance of a brand new Bray Shaman character, KRALMAW, who has links to Morghur. We now know that the next army to be released for Warhammer the Old World are the Children of Chaos, the Beastmen Bray Herds. I am working on a full-length video exploring the origins and evolutions of the Beastmen, right back to their origins in a completely different game, and through their period as just animaloids of every description. That video will come out when it's ready, but until then, I was too excited about the recent reveals of new Beastmen to sit on my hands. I had to do a little something, and I thought that Morghur would be a fun way to explore just a tiny sliver of Beastman lore and history in a fun, quick video. So that is what this is. It's not going to be an exhaustive exploration. It's just a quick few minutes, I suppose, about this cool character. So who or what or when or how or why or when or how or who is Morghur, and what do we know about them? Why are they important? What do we know about them? And why are they important? It was common in the Armies books for 6th edition to include just 2 or 3 special characters, a major decrease from the cast of characters in the previous books. For most factions, these were brand new characters as well. This was where you would find the Fey Enchantress or Luther Huss or Grimgor Ironhide. 5th edition's Champions of Chaos book had featured a couple of appropriately monstrous Beastmen special characters, Kazarak the One-Eye and Gorthor the Beast Lord, and both would actually find their way into the first dedicated Beastmen Armies book. Warhammer Armies Beasts of Chaos was released in 2003, written primarily by Gav Thorpe, with additional material by Anthony Reynolds, Steve Pritchard, and Steve Kaminsky. In this book, we would get the first appearance of that new special character we're interested in. More than just a beast, this was Morghur, the Master of Skulls, the Shadowgave. The story of Morghur is one of ancient, almost indescribably horrific origins. Morghur was born to Bretonnian parents 300 years ago, on the outskirts of the Forest of Arden. When travelling players visited his village just 3 days later, they discovered a scene so terrible it might drive one mad. The people of the village who still lived crawled around in the mud, with cloven hooves and twisted limbs, whilst the livestock walked on their hind legs and spoke in unfathomable tongues. Plagued by fiery visions of destruction, Morghur crawled into the woods and lived in a cave deep in the Arden forest, his shadow stretching far and wide. Beastmen worshipped this dark creature as a timeless spirit, claiming that if he were ever cut down, he would only be reborn elsewhere, his corruption continuing to spread ever wider. The art for Morghur is spectacular, suitably imposing and creepy. I'm not certain who drew this image, but the book's illustrations are credited to John Blanche, Alex Boyd, Paul Dainton, Nuala Kennedy, Carl Kapinski, and Adrian Smith. In September 2003, a miniature was also released to represent this dark spirit of corruption. Sculpted by the excellent Alex Hedstrom, I think there is an unusual sense of momentum to this model that definitely gives it a sinister aspect. In the 7th edition, much of the darker folk horror richness that had defined the Beastmen was simplified or stripped back, present but not emphasised in quite the way it had been. That change is exemplified by the entry for Morghur. Whilst much of the text that is included is only lightly reworked from the 6th edition book, it completely eschews the horrifying origin of the character, explaining only that Beastmen revere this dark spirit of beasts, and that Morghur is an ancient evil. The same details are included, though, about Ariel of the Wood Elves and her hatred for Morghur because of his corrupting taint across the forests of the Old World. This simplification is no doubt due in part to the number of special characters included in the 7th edition book. 6th edition had just 3 special characters, each with at least 2 pages of text, while 7th edition features 9 special characters, each receiving just a single page. This is closer to the volume of special characters in the earlier editions, but the result is that the background is a lot lighter, both in tone and volume, and so are the rules, with fewer special abilities and not nearly as much flavour text. Morghur's spirit essence of chaos is a good example of this. Here is the wonderfully dark description in the 6th edition. Morghur's expansive spirit leaks out of him, for it is too large to be contained within physical form, and it affects all but the most strong-willed of living things. Creatures are mutated horribly, their skin splitting open as their bones and muscles grow in random fashion, often merging 2 or more beings into a single horrific new spawn. Missiles that would strike him change in the air, turning bullets and arrows into birds or frogs, cannonballs into harmless puffs of smoke. In 7th edition, Morghur lost 5 of his special abilities, and that spirit essence of chaos rule was split into 2. Here's the equivalent description for one of those. Morghur's mutating spirit leaks out of him, changing the world around. Bolts and arrows fired at him turn into birds, bats, or frogs, spells into showers of warm blood, and cannonballs into puffs of smoke, while an enemy soldier might be transformed into a twisting mass of tentacles, a puddle of black jelly, or a pile of fish. I'm not sure exactly what this comparison reveals. It's still good stuff and suitably dark and chaotic, but I can't help but feel that some of the poetry may be missing in that later entry. Though, seeing as it came out just a few months before 8th edition launched, it was still a win that the Beastmen even received an Armies book for 7th edition at all, because they wouldn't be so lucky for the final edition of Warhammer. There was no Beastman Armies book for the 8th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battle, but Morghur specifically and the Beastmen generally did feature in the Wood Elves Armies book for that edition. Just as he had been in the previous Wood Elf book, Morghur was presented as something of a dark force of nature, known to the elves as Cyanothere, and responsible for the corruption of vast swathes of the forest. A constant foe of Ariel, Morghur would spring up again and again, being reborn after each defeat and causing civil war amongst the very forest itself, as sprites, dryads, and treemen fell to his ruinous influence. One aspect of the later armies books that I often love is how they work to weave the updated lore and new ideas into the background fluff that has gone before. In the case of Morghur, we are given new insights into the creation of the Glade of Woe that has existed since 4th edition, and Scarlock the Mercenary from even earlier editions is one of the elves who is said to have struck down a previous incarnation of Morghur. By the time of Warhammer Total War, the old world was no more, but the video game series has scoured classic background for new ideas, including the introduction of Morghur. Intriguingly, his demonette-style clawed arm is moved from the left to the right in this design, but either way, he's still suitably creepy. In Warhammer Fantasy Battle, Morghur is this kind of spirit of the beasts, this chaotic demigod, something greater than just a beastman, that is undescribable, unkillable, and just totally horrific. Reincarnated again and again, and spreading gross kind of destruction on an enormous scale throughout the Warhammer world. A very cool, horrible character that was a brilliant addition to the Beastmen lineup. And when the Warhammer world was destroyed in 2015, the cancellation of Warhammer Fantasy Battle and the continuation through Age of Sigmar, that was remembered. This is a great character, let's bring them across and have them feature in some way in the story of the Mortal Realms as well. Like many characters who survived the transition to AOS, Morghur has fully transcended into a godlike being, and is in fact an entity of enormous power that Beastmen Brayherds are trying to resurrect. Morghur is said to have planted prophecies and visions into the minds of his followers, and the Beastmen of the Gave-spawn Brayherd were in the process of helping him to manifest on the Mortal Realms, when a combined attack by the Sylvaneth and the Lumineth Realm Lords all but put an end to that possibility. However, some small part of his essence has survived, and he could yet be resurrected into the Age of Sigmar. Of course, with the removal of the Brayherds as a supported playable faction in AOS, the narrative around this resurrection or summoning of Morghur was presumably forced to take a different turn, taking the beastly spirit off of the table, for the time being at least. So the door has been left open for the Beastmen Brayherds and Morghur to reappear in the Age of Sigmar, should Games Workshop so wish. But we've also got this new opportunity to explore Morghur's history in the old world as well. And the first link to that has come through the creation of KRALMAW. As with many of the old world armies, the Beastmen will be receiving some brand new sculpts to go alongside the classic minis that are returning to the game. KRALMAW is the new Shaman miniature, and it is a doozy, if you ask me. First revealed at the start of the year as part of the Las Vegas Open preview, we've known about KRALMAW and his awesomely creepy familiar for quite a while, and his connection to Morghur is right in the open. The LVO preview suggested that the ageless Morghur the Shadowgave predicted the birth of a blind Bray shaman that would help plunge the world into darkness. And now, KRALMAW is believed to be that dangerous being. I'm really hoping that in time, we get to see one of these earlier incarnations of Morghur wreaking havoc across the old world. Both he and KRALMAW presaging the rise in the tides of dark chaos as we approach the Great War. One especially cool thing I think about KRALMAW is that he is featured in the Dark Magic section of the core rulebook. He was previewed before he was ever revealed, and I think that that is really fun. And he's not the only miniature who was previewed in this way either. There were also 2 of the new Empire Wizards with their familiars. And all of that makes me wonder if this amazing looking wood elf with her draconic familiar could be in line for a release when that army hits shelves in the future. I don't know what it was about Morghur specifically that really enticed me to just spend a little bit of time exploring his history and considering how he's changed over times. I think part of it is because we see the sort of story of Warhammer writ large through this character. They emerge in the 6th edition as things get darker. There's much more grimdark to Warhammer 6th edition than there is to previous editions. And this new character is the absolute epitome of just darkness and horror and Beastmen. It really is something quite perfect for that version of the Beastmen. That then becomes something more mythic and legendary and magical and spiritual, still super dark, but larger than life by the time you get to the 8th edition as these things have, that happened across pretty much every single army for that edition. Everything got more and more powerful, and the sort of narrative was buffed up in an interesting way. Some of that was great, some of that was potentially not as great. But you get this evolution from weird, creepy, inexplicable Lovecraftian horrors to something a little bit more powerful and sort of more understandable and very, very dark still. And then the end of the old world happens, the Age of Sigmar begins, and we are moving into a new era of gods and monsters who are actually walking the lands and fighting one another. And that is the direction that the Morghur story was going. It was all about the resurrection of Morghur and the sort of the potential for them to become a brand new miniature, brand new monster that would be on the battlefield. Obviously, that was cut short because we've had the old world return, and the change in prominence, the change in fortunes for Warhammer Fantasy Battle has meant that we've then redirected the story. So now Morghur is going to go back into Warhammer Fantasy Battle in the old world, which is somewhat more grounded and takes a sort of an approach that's closer to those earlier editions of Warhammer Fantasy Battle. So what will we see next from this character? I think that is a really interesting arc, and there's a potential for some really fun stuff that not only adds to the richness of those games and those worlds, but also tells us a little bit about how the games are developing and changing over time. The decisions that are made, the business decisions, the creative decisions, how all of that comes together into something super interesting. In any case, I hope that everyone is as excited as I am for the return of the Beasts of Chaos. Let me know in the comments what you are most excited about for the new release in the old world. I have really enjoyed taking a little bit of time to just delve into one very specific aspect of one army. So I might make videos like this again in the future. Let me know if you did enjoy it. Until next time, I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.